My name is Evelyn Carter, and I was 63 years old on the night my only daughter got married. I should have been celebrating, smiling for pictures, raising my glass to toast her happiness. Instead, I found myself standing in the glow of chandeliers, holding a half-empty champagne flute, listening to words that slice through me like broken glass. When she ends up in a nursing home, the penthouse will be ours, my daughter whispered to her new husband. Lauren's voice was sharp enough to carry even through the hum of the band. Ethan leaned closer, grinning, and answered, "It's just a matter of time. She's slipping already." I froze where I stood as if the parquet floor had turned to ice beneath my shoes. For a moment, I prayed I had misheard that my mind was playing tricks on me. But their laughter, soft, conspiratorial, cruel, confirmed every syllable. They hadn't seen me pause just a few feet away, the mother of the bride suddenly invisible in the swirl of music and clinking glasses. I forced myself to breathe, to place the flute gently on the edge of a table, so it wouldn't shatter from my shaking hands. Around me, guests swayed to the music, oblivious to the fracture that had just torn my world in half. My daughter, radiant in her ivory gown, had not only dismissed me as an inconvenience, but reduced my life to real estate and assets. I had given her everything, years of double shifts, sleepless nights, sacrifices that had reshaped my entire existence. And still, it wasn't enough. The smile on Ethan's face seared into me as I turned toward the exit. There would be no confrontation, no scene to ruin her perfect evening. Not tonight. My heart thundered in my chest, but my footsteps were steady as I crossed the lobby, retrieved my purse, and told the valet I was leaving early. "Are you all right, Mrs. Carter?" he asked, his young face lined with concern. "I'm fine." I lied, forcing calm into my voice, just tired. But as I drove away under the glittering Chicago skyline, I knew the truth. I had stepped out of that ballroom not only as a guest leaving a wedding, but as a mother leaving behind an illusion. And that was only the beginning. The night air pressed cool against my cheeks as I pulled the car out of the hotel driveway. Chicago's skyline shimmered like a jeweled crown across the river, but all I could feel was the heavy weight pressing against my chest. I had walked away quietly with no scene to mar her wedding, but the silence inside me roared louder than the music I had left behind. On the drive home, my mind betrayed me with memories I had tried so hard to keep polished like family heirlooms. Lauren at 5 years old sitting on the kitchen counter while I braided her hair before kindergarten. Her gap-toothed smile when I worked double shifts so she could have ballet lessons. The night she cried into my shoulder after her first heartbreak. Every picture replayed in my head, each one sharper than the next, and each one clashing against the cold words I had just heard. The penthouse where I was heading had been my sanctuary, my one indulgence after decades of sacrifice. I hadn't bought it to flaunt or to spite anyone. I bought it because I had finally earned a place where I could breathe, a space with high windows and a view of Lake Michigan that reminded me life still held beauty. I thought Lauren would understand. I thought she would be proud that her mother had managed to carve out something beyond mere survival. When I parked and walked through the marble lobby, the doorman's kind smile nearly undid me. "Long night, Mrs. Carter?" he asked gently. "Yes," I whispered, pressing my purse closer to my side. "Long night." In the elevator, I stared at my reflection in the polished steel. I didn't see an old woman ready for a nursing home. I saw someone cracked open, finally forced to look at what her daughter had become and what I had allowed all these years. I didn't know it yet, but the quiet ride upward was the first step into a life I had never dared to imagine. The penthouse was quiet when I unlocked the door, the faint hum of the city muffled by thick glass. Marisol looked up from the couch where she'd been reading with her glasses low on her nose. She had been in my life for more than 10 years, first as a housekeeper, but over time as something much more, a steady presence, a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone. "You're home early," she said, setting her book aside. Her accent curled warmly around the words. "Did the party finish already?" For a moment, I wanted to brush it off to claim exhaustion, to slip past her into the bedroom and bury myself beneath the sheets. But my body betrayed me. My shoulders sagged, my knees trembled, and I felt the sting of tears threatening. Marisol was on her feet before I could answer. "Senora Evelyn, what happened?" I tried to form words, but my throat burned. The sound that came out wasn't speech. It was a sob, raw and heavy. Marisol caught my arm, guiding me to the sofa, and before I knew it, I was crying into her shoulder. Not the quiet tears of polite grief, but the kind that came from somewhere deep, years of hurt unraveling all at once. "She doesn't see me," I choked. Not as a mother, not as a person, just as a key to the penthouse. Marisol tightened her arm around me, saying nothing, just letting the storm pour out. For the first time since Robert's funeral, I allowed myself to collapse into another person's care. The chandelier above us cast soft golden light, and the contrast between its beauty and the ugliness of what I had overheard made my heart ache all the more. When the sobs finally quieted, I sat up, pressing the heel of my hand against swollen eyes. Marisol poured me a glass of water without asking, her steady presence grounding me. I realized then that something had shifted. The illusions I had clung to about Lauren's love had shattered. All that remained was the truth and the long night stretching ahead of me. Morning light filtered through the tall windows, painting soft lines across the hardwood floor. My eyes were swollen from the tears, but my mind felt strangely clear, as if the storm had scrubbed away years of denial. Marisol brought me chamomile tea, setting it quietly on the table beside me. She didn't press, didn't pry. Her silence was its own kind of mercy. The phone buzzed against the countertop, shattering the calm. Lauren's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring until it went dark. A minute later, a text appeared. "Mom, where did you go last night? People were asking about you. Call me." No words about my well-being, no recognition that I had left her wedding without explanation, just irritation that I hadn't played my part. I stared at the message until the letters blurred, then set the phone face down. By noon, the calls returned. This time I answered. Finally, Lauren said, her voice brisk. "You vanished last night. Do you know how embarrassing that was for me? David's parents kept asking where you'd gone." I swallowed hard. I wasn't feeling well. You could have told someone, she huffed. "Anyway, we're opening gifts today at 3. You'll come help write down who gave what. It's tradition." Her tone wasn't an invitation. It was a directive, as if my role were a servant's duty. I closed my eyes and for the first time let the answer form without fear. "I'm sorry, Lauren. I can't today. I already have plans." There was a pause, sharp disbelief. "Plans? With who? Lunch with Marisol. It's important." She scoffed, almost laughing. "You can take her out any day. This is my wedding, Mother." "I made a commitment," I said softly, but with more strength than I expected. "I hope you and David enjoy your gifts." Before she could protest, I ended the call. My hand shook, but a strange sense of power settled inside me. For the first time in years, I had chosen myself. That evening, after the tension of Lauren's call had faded into silence, I found myself standing in front of a closet I hadn't opened in decades. Inside, behind boxes of old linens and forgotten keepsakes, leaned a battered wooden case. My fingers traced its edges before pulling it out, dust rising in the air like ghosts of a life I had abandoned. I unlatched the case and found my old brushes, the tubes of paint hardened at the corners, a stack of blank canvases yellowed around the edges. Once long ago, before Robert and before the endless demands of survival, I had dreamed of being an artist. I had won a scholarship to art school, but I turned it down to marry, to raise a family, to live responsibly. Life had filled in the space where art once lived until I barely remembered the girl who sketched sunsets on notebook paper. I carried the easel to the wide window in the living room facing the sweep of Lake Michigan. As the city lights flickered on, I spread the paints across the table and set a canvas upright. I didn't know where to start, so I dipped the brush into the brightest blue I could find and let my hand move. The strokes were clumsy, uneven, but there was something freeing in the imperfection. When I finally set the brush down, a surge of resolve rose with it. Painting had reminded me that I still had choices. That night, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Richard Myers," the steady voice answered. "It's Evelyn," I said. "I need to make changes to my will." "Urgently." A pause then. "Of course." "What's prompted this?" "Let's just say I've been reminded of what truly matters," I replied. "Can you come by tomorrow morning? I'll be there at 11, he said without hesitation. As I hung up, I glanced back at the canvas. The strokes were messy, unfinished, but undeniably mine. For the first time in years, so was my life. Richard had barely left the next morning, his briefcase full of notes, when the intercom buzzed sharply. Marisol glanced at me uncertain before pressing the button. Lauren's voice crackled through, clipped and impatient. "Mother, we're coming up." Before I could object, she and Ethan were already striding into the living room as if they owned it. Ethan headed straight for the bar, pouring himself a scotch, without asking. Lauren dropped onto the sofa, crossing her legs like a queen expecting a subject to kneel. "We need to talk about your behavior," she began, her tone accusatory. "Leaving the wedding early, skipping the gift opening, you embarrassed me." I sat across from her, hands folded in my lap, and let the calm settle over me. "You're right," I said. "We do need to talk." Ethan smirked, swirling his glass. "Patricia." "It's Evelyn," I cut in, steady but firm. "And what I heard at that wedding is the real reason I left." Lauren's brows knitted. "What are you talking about?" I leaned forward, meeting her eyes. "You whispered to Ethan, 'When she ends up in a nursing home, the penthouse will be ours.'" The color drained from her face. Ethan's glass froze mid-air. You heard that," Lauren stammered. "Every word." The silence stretched heavy and sharp. Finally, Lauren forced a laugh. "You misunderstood. It was a joke. It didn't sound like one." Ethan set down his drink, feigning diplomacy. "People say things they don't mean in the moment. Weddings, champagne." "And which part didn't you mean?" I asked quietly. "Calling me an old lady or planning to take my home?" Lauren's voice rose defensive. "You're being dramatic. We're just concerned about you living here alone." I stood walking toward the window that framed the lake. "Concern looks different, Lauren. Concern doesn't calculate what it stands to gain." Her silence was answer enough. I turned back slowly. "This conversation is over, and so are your assumptions about my future." A week passed before I heard from Lauren again. This time her tone was sweet, careful, almost rehearsed. She invited me to dinner at her townhouse, just us. She said no fuss, no arguments. Against my better judgment, I agreed. A part of me wanted to believe she could mean it. When I arrived that Saturday evening, the table was set with china I recognized from her wedding registry. Candles flickered in tall glass holders, and a roast filled the air with the kind of aroma that carried memories of family dinners long gone. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble," I said, handing her the flowers I'd brought. "Nothing's too much trouble for my mom," she answered, smiling. Her words should have warmed me, but something in her eyes didn't match. Throughout the meal, she was attentive, asking about my art classes, laughing at stories about the quirky neighbors in my building. For a while, it almost felt real. She even brought out a photo album from her childhood. We sat together, flipping pages, her in a tutu at 5, her father holding her at the beach, birthday cakes with lopsided candles. "You gave up so much for me," she murmured, tracing a picture with her finger. I never really appreciated it until now. The sincerity in her voice pulled at me, and for a fleeting second I wanted to believe. But then came the pause, the too casual clearing of her throat. "Mom," she said softly, pouring us each a glass of port, "since we're rebuilding our relationship, maybe you could reconsider the will. I mean, she works for you. I'm your daughter." And there it was, the reason for the candlelight, the photos, the tender words. I set my glass down carefully. Is that what all this has been about?" Her smile faltered, and the silence that followed was louder than any argument we had ever had. 3 days after that hollow dinner, a thick envelope arrived by certified mail. My stomach dropped the moment I saw the law firm's seal across the top. I carried it to the kitchen table, hands trembling as I tore it open. The words blurred as I read, but the meaning was unmistakable. Lauren was petitioning the court for guardianship over me. She claimed I was suffering from early dementia, that Marisol had manipulated me into making reckless financial decisions, that I was no longer capable of handling my own affairs. The betrayal stole my breath. It wasn't enough that she coveted my home. She wanted my autonomy, my dignity, the very essence of who I was. I called Richard immediately. He listened quietly as I read the allegations aloud, my voice shaking. When I finished, there was a long pause. "This is low," he said finally, "even for her. But don't panic, Evelyn. We'll fight this. You've had recent evaluations from your doctor, and I'll make sure he testifies to your competence. Courts do not look kindly on frivolous petitions." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. Still, it feels like my own daughter is trying to bury me alive. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the penthouse in the dark, touching the walls, the framed photographs, the balcony railing that overlooked the glittering lake. Everything I had worked for was being twisted into evidence against me. In Lauren's version of the story, my home was proof I was irresponsible. My friendship with Marisol, proof I was vulnerable. My independence, proof I was delusional. I sat in the quiet until dawn, anger hardening into resolve. She could drag me into court, but she would not drag me into silence. The fight for my life had just begun, and I was ready to meet her on the battlefield she had chosen. 2 nights before the first court hearing, the doorbell rang just after dusk. I wasn't expecting anyone. Marisol peeked through the peephole, then turned to me with wide eyes. "It's him," she whispered. Ethan stood in the hallway. His tie loosened his expression uneasy. I hesitated, then opened the door only halfway. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice flat. "I need to talk," he said quickly. "Please, she doesn't know I'm here." Against my instincts, I let him in. He paced the living room, running a hand through his hair. The confidence he carried at the wedding was gone, replaced by a nervous energy that made him look younger, almost lost. "I told Lauren she was going too far," he began. "This guardianship petition lying about your mental state. It's wrong. I couldn't sit by and let it happen." I studied him carefully, searching for manipulation. Why the sudden conscience? He stopped pacing, exhaling sharply. "Because I'm not blind anymore. I married her knowing she came from money. I'll admit that. But this, trying to strip her own mother of independence just to get a penthouse? That's a line I won't cross." He sank into the chair across from me, lowering his voice. "There's something else. Lauren's been telling people your family owns land in Colorado. Old money inheritance, all of that. She told me the same thing when we met, said it would all come to us one day." I frowned. That's not true. Robert and I lived modestly. Everything I own, I earned after he passed. There is no family land. Ethan's face paled. So she lied. To me, to everyone. Silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of his admission. "What are you going to do?" I asked. He stood shoulders squared for the first time that evening. "Call my lawyer. Withdraw my support for her case. And then figure out my marriage." When the door closed behind him, I sat back in the stillness. For the first time in weeks, I realized Lauren wasn't just destroying me, she was destroying herself. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and paper, the kind of scent that clung to spaces where too many lives had been unraveled. I sat at the petitioner's table beside Richard, my palms damp but my head held high. Across the aisle, Lauren whispered furiously with her attorney, her face tight with determination. She wouldn't meet my eyes. When the judge entered, we rose. My chest tightened at the sight of my daughter standing against me, a stranger draped in familiar skin. Her lawyer painted a portrait of me as fragile, confused, easily swayed by household staff. He described Marisol as a manipulator, suggested that my purchase of art supplies was a sign of erratic spending, and even implied that my late-night calls to Richard showed paranoia. Each word felt like a lash, yet I remained still, letting them dig their own hole. Then it was Richard's turn. Calm, steady, unflinching, he introduced medical records testimony from my physician and a sworn evaluation of my mental competence. Mrs. Carter, he said, is not only capable of handling her affairs, she is actively rebuilding her life with clarity and purpose. The doctor himself testified, his voice clear. Evelyn Carter is of sound mind. There is no evidence of cognitive decline. When the judge finally spoke, his words carried the weight of a gavel long before it struck wood. This petition is without merit. It is an abuse of the court's time and resources. Dismissed. The sound of the gavel echoed like thunder, and relief washed over me so quickly I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. Lauren's face hardened, her lips pressed into a line. She gathered her purse without looking back at me, storming out as if she were the injured party. I stayed seated, breathing deeply, my hands finally steady. For the first time in months, I felt something I thought I had lost control over my own life. Weeks passed in uneasy quiet. I spent my days painting by the wide windows, the lake shifting colors with the season, each canvas a small act of reclaiming myself. Then one gray afternoon, the phone rang with a name I hadn't seen in weeks. Mom Lauren said, her voice subdued. "Can we meet, please?" We chose a cafe near the lake neutral ground. When I walked in, she was already there, sitting small in a corner booth, her usual polish stripped away. Her hair was pulled back without care, her blouse wrinkled. For the first time in years, she looked less like the woman I feared and more like the child I once held. David's leaving me, she admitted, stirring coffee she never drank. He says I lied to him. About everything. About money, about you. And I did. I don't even know who I am anymore. I listened, my hands folded in my lap. The bitterness in her confession wasn't aimed at me, it was turned inward. "I'm not here to beg for money," she said quickly, meeting my eyes. I don't want to lose you too." The ache in my chest was sharp, but I forced my voice to stay calm. "Lauren, I've never wanted to lose you. But a relationship built on entitlement and demands isn't a relationship at all." Tears slid down her cheeks. "I don't know if I can be what you need me to be." "You don't need to be anything," I told her softly, "except honest." We sat in silence, the clatter of cups and low hum of conversation filling the space around us. For the first time, her hand reached across the table, tentative, uncertain. I let mine rest on top of hers, not as a promise of forgiveness, but as a fragile truce. As I walked home later, the air cold against my face, I understood the truth. My daughter might never become the person I once hoped for, but she was trying, and perhaps that was enough to begin again. 6 months later, the penthouse felt different, as if the walls themselves had exhaled after years of tension. Canvases leaned against nearly every surface, streaked with colors I hadn't touched in decades. One had even sold at a small community exhibition, not for much, but enough to make me smile at the thought that someone else saw beauty in what I created. On Sunday evenings, Marisol and I would sit on the balcony with cups of tea, the sun melting into the horizon. Sometimes she would shake her head at the stacks of canvases, teasing me that I was running out of space. Other times, she would simply sit in silence, the comfort of her presence more valuable than anything money could buy. Lauren had begun visiting occasionally, no longer with demands, but with halting attempts at conversation. She still carried traces of entitlement habits built over a lifetime, but she was trying. She had moved into a modest apartment, taken a less prestigious job, and even started therapy. For the first time, our talks weren't about what she wanted from me, but about who she wanted to become. I didn't fool myself into thinking we were healed. Wounds like ours don't vanish with a few coffees and cautious hugs. But there was a beginning, fragile, yet real. One evening, as the lake shimmered with the last light of day, I realized that my true legacy was never the penthouse or the accounts Richard managed. It was the courage to protect myself when no one else would the wisdom to recognize genuine care in people like Marisol, and the strength to stand firm even when love itself betrayed me. The penthouse would one day pass to Marisol. Lauren might or might not find her way back fully, but for me at last there was peace, a life not defined by sacrifice alone, but by the choice to finally live on my own terms. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.